Tonight's big stories. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy makes a surprise visit to Manila to shore up support for a peace summit next month and gets a warm welcome from President Marcos in Malacanang.
At the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin reiterates the U.S.'s ironclad commitment to the Philippines, but stops short of backing up President Marcos on what will trigger the Mutual Defense Treaty.
And former Health Secretary Francisco Duque III is facing graft charges over the irregular transfer of COVID funds, telling the lower house that it was former President Duterte who ordered it in the first place.
Good evening. Welcome to the show. I'm Regina.
I'm Gretchen.
And I'm Shawn.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy made a surprise visit to the Philippines after he and President Marcos missed each other at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore over the weekend. Zelenskyy arrived in Manila late Sunday night with heavy security after taking part in the high-level defense forum. He was welcomed earlier today to Malacanang, where he and Marcos spoke about strengthening diplomatic ties amid Ukraine's war with Russia. President Marcos assured Zelenskyy that Manila remains committed to assisting Ukraine.
We will continue to do all that we can to promote peace and to bring an end to the fighting and to come to a political resolution of your country. I know it is. I think everybody fully understands that it is easier said than done.
Mr. President, I'm happy to hear today from you that you participate our peace steps to the peace. That's real thing. What really want our people just to bring peace to our homes. Yes, and thank you for participation of Peace Summit. That's very strong signal. Like I said, we have for today more than 100 countries.
This isn't the first time that the Philippines has extended its support to Ukraine under President Marcos. Last year, the Philippines voted along with 140 countries to demand that Russia withdraw its forces from Ukraine. February this year, the country renewed its support for Ukraine's sovereignty. Ukraine is also hoping to open an embassy in Manila this year.
Following today's meeting, Zelenskyy posted on X saying, "I am grateful to the Philippines for supporting Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, for its clear position on Russia's aggression against our country, and for supporting important UN resolutions." He also said, "We discussed the inaugural Global Peace Summit and the importance of Southeast Asian countries being represented there. I am pleased the Philippines will participate in the summit." The summit is being organized by Switzerland and will be held next month, though there is no official confirmation yet from Malacanang about whether or not Marcos is going.
Now, the two heads of state were not able to meet at the Shangri-La Forum, as we mentioned earlier, but both of them mentioned China during their respective plenary sessions. Zelenskyy went so far as to accuse China of pressuring other countries not to attend the upcoming peace summit.
Unfortunately, Russia using China's influence in the region. Using Chinese diplomats does everything to disrupt the peace summit. Unfortunately, such a big, independent and powerful country like China is an instrument in the hands of Putin.
I was so surprised to see the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy show up in Manila in very casual clothes with heavy security.
Well, he's known for his casual clothes. He showed up to the Shangri-La Dialogue wearing the same thing. But it was all hush-hush, that's right. Even the media weren't informed until the very last minute.
Maybe because of security issues.
Correct.
Also,
it is because of security issues.
But he was seen to be drumming up support for that Global Peace Summit in Switzerland in June, which he says that Russia has been undermining and China has kind of aided them on that. That's what he said.
Well, Russia's not going to be part of that summit. And so, according to him, there's at least 100 countries now that have committed to going to that Global Peace Summit.
And it's already been
but
more than 2 years.
Russia is not invited to
China is not attending, but they say it's because it isn't supported by both Russia and Ukraine.
Well,
Interesting.
Yeah, it has been more than 2 years since the invasion.
February 24, 2022 exactly is the day when Russia invaded Ukraine.
So that's 2 years and 3 months to be exact, still not about to stop. And again, Zelensky did say that Ukraine needs more mental health workers for its soldiers, with President Bongbong Marcos promising to help and welcoming a decision by Ukraine to open an embassy here in Manila this year, which will hasten efforts to deliver assistance to war-torn Ukraine.
I remember this was one of the first challenging questions thrown at President Bongbong Marcos upon his inauguration. Tinanong siya parang what was his stance in this
on the war. Because
yeah.
that's right.
And I remember he sided with Ukraine at the very start. So ito nagpapasalamat si Volodymyr Zelensky. But I've read also it is because of the warming of ties between the Philippines and Russia during the Duterte administration. I guess that's why also the president made an effort to come here to the Philippines.
That's right.
It has been clear, as we laid out in the timeline earlier, the Philippines' position on the war in Ukraine has been pretty clear from the start. The DFA has made that very, very clear. There's also, I was going to share with you one interesting little tidbit between the two gentlemen, which is that they were both on Times Person of the Year. Zelensky was Times 2022 Person of the Year, whereas President Marcos was among the 100 influential people of 2024.
To be fair, President Duterte also made it to those time lists.
That is true. And so did President Trump, but we're not talking about them. We're talking about the two
Vladimir
gentlemen.
Putin.
Yeah. And
Vladimir
you know,
Putin.
from all indications, they seem to have a very good, amiable, congenial meeting.
Right. Wait, guys, speaking of China, there was another incident apparently. The Inquirer first reported that the Chinese Coast Guard was caught seizing and throwing overboard supplies meant for Philippine troops stationed at the BRP Sierra Madre. Footage released by China's own state media shows that it was the Chinese Coast Guard that first approached the Filipinos. But instead, China used this video to accuse Filipino soldiers of threatening them with guns. Gio Robles with the rest of that story.
This is the new video China released allegedly showing Filipino soldiers stationed at the BRP Sierra Madre in Ayungin Shoal pointing guns at them. The incident allegedly occurred on May 19 during an airdrop resupply mission. The 30-second video released by a Chinese state-controlled media showed the airdrop of supplies to the BRP Sierra Madre. In the next shot, a Chinese inflatable boat is seen approaching the grounded ship. This was when Philippine soldiers stood on deck of the BRP Sierra Madre, appearing alert as they observed the approaching Chinese rubber boat. Chinese media accused the Filipino personnel of holding guns that they pointed at the Chinese Coast Guard, though this allegation was not captured in the footage. Aside from this incident, a ranking military official who refused to be named claimed that the Chinese Coast Guard seized the food and other supplies meant for Filipino troops on BRP Sierra Madre. These supplies were then thrown in the water. China also allegedly blocked or obstructed the medical evacuation of ailing Filipino soldiers. The AFP has yet to release a statement on the incident. But based on the 2016 arbitral ruling, China's rampant patrols in the Ayungin Shoal are illegal, especially as the area falls under the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. Chinese and Philippine ships have collided several times in Ayungin and other parts of the West Philippine Sea. China cited this as the reason why they are now running out of patience. In the 21st Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore this weekend, Chinese defense minister said China has maintained sufficient restraint in the face of rights infringements and provocation, but noted that there are limits to this. Though China did not name any state or official, it can be recalled that President Bongbong Marcos in the same forum declared that the Philippines will not yield to threats to its sovereignty in the West Philippine Sea.
As president, I have sworn to this solemn commitment from the very first day that I took office. I do not intend to yield. Filipinos do not yield.
Marcos also stressed that his administration will do whatever it takes to protect our sovereign home. For News 5, Gio Robles, We Are One News.
Heard those lines from the president, and as expected, President Marcos's keynote address at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore generated headlines all over the world. For the most part, foreign news outlets highlighted his pushback of Beijing in his speech. He was widely quoted by everyone from the BBC to the Nikkei to Bloomberg and CNN for calling out China's aggression and for laying down a red line. That red line, as what he told a packed ballroom, is when a Filipino, whether a serviceman or an ordinary citizen, is killed through a willful act by China.
If a Filipino citizen is killed by a willful act, that is, I think, very, very close to what we define as an act of war, and therefore we will respond accordingly. And our treaty partners, I believe, also hold that same standard for when the actions with the joint action will be undertaken in support of any such incident in the Philippines. But once we get to that point, that is certainly, we would have crossed the Rubicon, certainly crossed the Rubicon. Is that a red line? Almost certainly it's going to be a red line.
Except U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was asked the next day whether he was on the same page as Marcos and whether the U.S. would view the death of a Filipino an act of war too. And Secretary Austin evaded the question.
I won't speculate on any hypothetical situation. What I would say, though, is that what we are doing and what we continue to try to do is to make sure that that doesn't happen. And by increasing dialogue between major powers and making sure that countries are working together to promote freedom of the seas and freedom of the skies, that will narrow the possibility that this happens. I will continue to emphasize that our commitment to the Mutual Defense Treaty is ironclad.
After his keynote, Austin met with his counterpart, Defense Secretary Guo on Saturday for a formal bilateral meeting. The two updated each other on the progress made by both countries since the recent Squad meeting in Hawaii. The DND also quoted Austin as saying during the meeting, and I quote, "We are beyond friends and allies. We are family. What affects you affects us."
To help us unpack all of these, we have with us on the show tonight Richard Heydarian. He's senior lecturer at the UP Asian Center and, of course, our resident geopolitical and international affairs expert. Good evening, Richard. Thanks for being with us again.
Good evening, guys.
Where are you? Are you here? Are you in Manila?
Yeah, finally.
I thought that was daylight.
I know, you're always all over the globe, speaking here, talking there. So thanks for being with us. Listen, the first thing I wanted to ask you was about that soundbite from Secretary Austin, not wanting to address the question of what will constitute, what would trigger the Mutual Defense Treaty. I mean, it was a global, it's a incredibly high level forum, so much media attention on there. He keeps talking about how the U.S. commitment to the Philippines is ironclad. And don't you think that would have been the perfect time to reiterate that and and to echo what President Marcos has said about, what the red line is, which is that if a Filipino were, through a willful act, killed in disputed waters. So what did you make of that? Or are we just, making a mountain out of a molehill here?
Well, I mean, I used to quite regularly attend the Shangri-La dialogue, especially in the pre-pandemic years when U.S. and China had effective communication channels. And I think there were a lot of occasions when the Americans were quite open about the parameters or extent of their bilateral relationship. As far as that question is concerned, President Biden, no less than President Biden himself, has been very clear about this, and also Secretary of State Antony Blinken, that any attack on Philippine public vessels, meaning both Coast Guard and also Philippine Navy forces, will automatically trigger the Mutual Defense Treaty. So I don't think there was a need for Austin to make any further clarification, since Biden himself, the American commander-in-chief, did that. Let's not forget, he came to this Shangri-La dialogue, though, because, among other things, he had a chance to talk to his Chinese counterpart. So the former Chinese defense minister, we don't know what happened to him. The same thing with the former Chinese foreign minister, a lot of purge. A lot of domestic upheavals is happening as far as chain of command is concerned in China. So in this venue, I think Secretary Austin's priority was not to make fireworks, right? And to make sure he creates the conditions for a substantive dialogue with his Chinese counterpart, because this is the worrying thing. Over the past 18 months, essentially, the two defense chiefs of China and the United States have not had any formal meeting. And that finally happened, of course, last week in the Shangri-La dialogue. So I think his priority was to work on ways to rebuild that communication channels while also reiterating that his focus right now is deterrence. Why should we even talk about what will the U.S. do when war happens, when the U.S. can help the Philippines as early as now to make sure China will not even dare to engage in something funny. So I think that is why, that's my understanding of why he said it's hypothetical, when Biden and Blinken were very clear about even in that hypothetical, the mutual defense treaty will apply.
So this shouldn't be seen as a wavering of the U.S.'s commitment to the Philippines.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you cannot go higher than Biden, right? And that's what he clarified during the Japan-Philippine-U.S. JAFOS Trilateral Summit in Washington, D.C. the other month. And if you look at the discussions that the Squad had, the Philippines, Australia, Japan, and the Philippines, also in Hawaii a few weeks ago, it was also a discussion about how can they help the Philippines to better uphold its territorial integrity and sovereign rights in the area. So no, I wouldn't read too much into it. In fact, to be honest, this question keeps on coming up every year. So I hope people will not ask, the same question over and over again and have more interesting questions in Shangri-La dialogues nowadays.
Okay, well, as we know, Richard, of course, President Marcos had the stage for the very first time. The Philippines had the stage for the very first time. And conversely to U.S. Secretary Austin, he made some very, very strong statements at the Shangri-La dialogue. He did say, of course, the Philippines will not yield. We will defend the Philippines at all costs. Let's run a soundbite to refresh all our memories from that speech.
So the lines that we draw in our waters are not derived from just our imagination, but from international law. We have on our side the 1982 UNCLOS and the binding 2016 arbitral award, which affirms what is ours by legal right. As president, I have sworn to this solemn commitment from the very first day that I took office. I do not intend to yield. Filipinos do not yield.
The thoughts on the spiciness of our president's statements on that stage, Richard? Of course, he did say he had a lot more sound bites than that, but let's work through that one first. Were you shocked at how he had so explicitly said things in that platform to that audience, or was it just about what you expected?
Well, it looks like it's the same speechwriter that he did also a speech for the Australian Parliament. Remember, a few months ago, he was for a state visit to Australia, and he made also exactly the same thing. He said Filipinos do not yield, and that what he's doing in the West Philippines states not a reflection of his personal preference, it's a reflection of his mandate to the Filipino people, especially when surveys are saying 70-80% of Filipinos want the current direction of our foreign policy, which is standing up to China, resisting the bullying there in the West Philippines. I think in fairness to President Marcos Jr., he tried to create a balance because he's very conscious. He's invited by Singapore, a country that tries to have a neutral relationship with both superpowers, at least on the surface, performatively, although much of Singapore's weapon system is from the West and the US. There are also other ASEAN countries there. So the strategy of China coming into this conference was to paint the Philippines as the deputy sheriff of America and to paint us as the anomaly in ASEAN. So that's why President Marcos Jr. correctly said, we don't want to choose between the two superpowers. It's important for both superpowers to be part of a constructive and inclusive order, that the peace and prosperity in this part of the world depends on the two superpowers. But at the same time, he also made it clear that, quote unquote, it's a permanent fact, he said, that China wants to achieve a certain kind of hegemony in this part of the world. He didn't mention the word hegemony, but he said a kind of influence that allows China to determine our economic and geopolitical future here. That's why you need America to counterbalance China. So I think it was a very eloquent and I think a very comprehensive speech whereby, he made it clear that the Philippines is not the aggressor here. We're not the troublemaker here. We respect our Southeast Asian partners and ASEAN fellows who want to have a balanced relationship. We would love to have the same thing, but we cannot have a friendly relationship with countries who are not friendly to us. We want to be friend to everyone, but we cannot be friends to those who act like enemies to us. So in that sense, I think it was a very balanced speech. And I think the president deserves commendation because if you look at the Chinese delegation, it was like a troll army, right? They're not asking questions. If you look at throughout the Shangri-La dialogue, there were all these generals and colonels from China who would just go ranting. they're not there asking questions. They would just try to rant and paint China as the victim and paint the Philippines and the West and everyone as conspiratorial and trying to contain them, supposed Asian NATO. So, and I don't think they did the good, diplomacy for themselves. I think they just painted themselves as a completely isolationist and self-referential, if not narcissistic superpower, which doesn't want to respect other countries' point of view, including smaller countries like the Philippines. And them pretending to be as if they're the representative of ASEAN and lecturing Marcos on what the ASEAN does. I'm not sure that went well with a lot of our ASEAN partners.
Actually, you're right. The first person who asked President Marcos a question after his speech was General Xu Hui, who, I should point out, is the commandant of the Chinese military's International College of Defense Studies. And you're right, he went on a long preamble about ASEAN centrality before having to be prompted by the IISS Executive Chairman John Chipman about this question. So that's just a little side story. That's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So I was slightly disappointed. This was a good opportunity for China to show that they're a responsible power. They're here for dialogue, but no. They were just talking to their own domestic audience. I mean, we used to call this wolf warrior diplomacy, and wolf warrior diplomacy was mostly a Chinese foreign ministry phenomenon. Now, seeing Chinese generals in their uniform and all, making threatening statements, painting the Philippines and Taiwan as troublemakers, and saying our patience is running out. My goodness, this doesn't reflect well on China. They don't look like a responsible power. They look like a country that wants to impose its will on the rest of the region and has zero respect and contempt for the points of view of other countries, including the Philippines. So, in fairness to Marcos, he held his he held his line and he held his temper. I think if another leader was questioned that way with some whatever general in another country, he would have responded more aggressively. I would have responded more aggressively.
Well, Richard, as we all know, the main audience in that ballroom was Asia. I mean, the ASEAN region was there for sure, very well represented. But it also felt like the president was that little brother calling out to everybody in the room, asking to be heard equally as the superpowers, China, United States, and so on and so forth. You think he was also trying to appeal for more support in the ASEAN region? Was that part of the strategy?
Yeah, I think that was definitely part of the strategy to say to the rest of ASEAN, we are one of you. We're not America's deputy, sheriff in ASEAN. We're not the troublemakers here. We're the one being bullied. We're the weaker party, right? And I think China was not very convincing when they tried to paint themselves as the victim and as if there's an Asian NATO forming around them. That is definitely not the case. So I think China was pretty poor in terms of its defense diplomacy, if any diplomacy at all. Well, I think President Marcos Jr. did a pretty decent job of trying to reach out to the rest of the region. But of course, the Shangri-La dialogue is a global phenomenon. There are representatives from France, from Britain, from Germany, from many countries all around the region. And I think Marcos was also trying to reach out to those countries. And if you look at the speech of Marcos Jr., it perfectly, jives and syncs with the keynote speeches by previous keynote speaker. For instance, Malcolm Turnbull in 2017, who presented Australia as a bridging power, middle power, who doesn't want to be dictated upon by the superpowers. Speech by Narendra Modi in 2018. Speech the other year by Fumio Kishida of Japan. So if you look at a lot of keynote speakers recently, they don't come from superpower countries. And what they're saying is that, no, it's not just two elephants and the rest of us are grass. No. This is a savanna. This is Lion King, right? There are all sorts of different animals, maybe not as big as the elephants here, but we have our vision, we have our sovereign rights, and we have to have our voice. So kudos to Singapore for giving the Philippines, a key ASEAN member, this kind of platform. And I think President Marcos Jr. justified that keynote speech with the balanced kind of speech that he gave given circumstances.
Well, my favorite part, apart from the very quotable Filipinos do not yield, my jaw literally dropped while watching when President Marcos said to the U.S. and China, manage your rivalry. I was shocked to hear him calling out, as what Gretchen said, maybe it's them or us calling out to our big brothers, quote unquote, to help us to get heard. But how do you think what effect would this have with regard to the ASEAN, where we are literally on our own in terms of policy?
Well, I think that quote from Marcos is probably a reason why Lloyd Austin didn't want to talk about scenarios when U.S. will go to war with China, right? And I think that's why Lloyd Austin was relatively tempered in his speech, because U.S. is saying we're open to reopening communication channels. We don't control what Nancy Pelosi did back 2 years ago or 3 years ago, right? So we want these communication channels to be restored. So actually, the onus was on China, and I don't think they did a very good job of showing they're the victims here, and the U.S. and the rest are aggressors. Now, no, speaking of ASEAN, Cambodia, maybe Laos. Well, Laos is the chairman right now, so they have to be a bit neutral or pretend to do. But the Cambodias and Myanmars and those ones, of course, they're not going to side with us. Of course, they're too dependent on China. But Indonesia and Prabowo, the incoming president, was one of the speakers. Singapore, of course, who invited the Philippines to give the keynote speech. Indonesia, Singapore, these countries are very important, not to mention Vietnam, right? So I think there are certain countries in ASEAN who are very influential, who have global voice, and are at most fence-sitters, and who may be sympathetic to our cause, except they have their own reasons not to be as vocal as us. So there's a part of me suspecting they made Marcos the keynote speaker because they wanted the Philippines to say what they didn't want to say themselves, right? I'm not sure if the Chinese read it that way, but I wouldn't be surprised that was the hidden kind of agenda, like let the Filipinos do the dirty job and expose China, because perhaps we're not in the mood for that. And Indonesia itself is, of course, going through a transition, and Singapore just had its own new prime minister recently. So perhaps domestic political transitions may also explain why these countries have been soft pedaling or not as calling out China the way we expect them to. So no, it's not true we're totally alone, but it is true that we're way ahead of everyone else in calling out China, including compared to the Vietnamese.
Well, we're certainly no fence-sitters. On your point about China, the Chinese delegation not caring about how they come across during the dialogue, I also wanted to point out the Defense Minister, Admiral Dong Jun, right, talked about in his speech crushing separatists who try to get in between them and Taiwan, right? So he minced no words. What did you make of that speech?
Yeah, again, isn't it weird that China talks about itself as a victim and Taiwan as the supposed aggressor when they just finalized arguably their biggest and most complex and sophisticated war games all around Taiwan, right? So it's just weird for a country that just conducted these massively intimidating, complex military operations around Taiwan to come out and say, oh, we're the victims and the Taiwanese are the aggressors, right? And just after a week when the new president of Taiwan, Lai, made it clear that he wants the status quo, meaning we're not going to declare independence. It's not true that we're quote-unquote secessionists. We want a status quo whereby we agree to disagree, who is the ultimate China, and we're not going to push for formal independence of Taiwan. So then again, I felt Dong is more talking to his bosses back in Beijing or in the Central Military Commission in Beijing, rather than to the international community. And I think this is worrying. Actually, I'm worried. I'm not happy that China is like this. I think it's worrying because all of us, we grow up on all of this literature that says China is so sophisticated, they can plan for the next 1,000 years. I don't know if they know what they're doing and what are they going to do about the Philippines and Taiwan in the next 30, 60 days. So I'm a bit worried. So my only hope is because parating ng monsoon and mga bagyo, siguro medyo yung mga bubuling nang nangyari sa West Philippine Sea will tone down because nature perhaps will force us to de-escalate tensions. So yeah, I think the comments on Taiwan were very,
right. But to
weird, right?
But to be blunt about it, I wanted to know whether you thought they were signaling that something imminent might happen, that they were getting closer to annex Taiwan. And let me just read out some of the other quotes from that speech. He said, separatists will be, quote unquote, nailed to the pillar of shame in history and crushed to pieces. So again, very forceful language there. And I wonder whether you've heard that from him before and what this means possibly for Taiwan in the near future.
The term crushed, that was used already by previous Chinese defense ministers, including not the predecessor immediately, but the other one the other year. So since 2019, we see this uptick in rhetoric by President Xi Jinping, paramount leader Xi Jinping, and all top Chinese leaders. So I think that's the rhetoric right now. But my hope is behind the scenes, we're seeing a different kind of China, not necessarily, chummy, but more reasonable, more statesman-like. So it is possible that there's a double messaging going on here, whereby in international fora, they go wolf warrior and try to impress, folks back home that we're standing up to the world, etc., and impressing Xi Jinping and their bosses. But I'm hoping that behind the scenes, when they talk to their American or Filipino counterparts, they'll say, okay, what do we do here to avoid a war situation? Because realistically, even the latest exercise that China did, if you analyze it, if you talk to the experts, they would say, still China is not there. China is not there yet. And China also knows that it's not there yet in terms of the ability to pull off an invasion of Taiwan in a convincing and seamless way. Probably that will take 5 to 10 years from now, also depending on what US and others are doing, and everyone is preparing. And on the West Philippine Sea, they also don't want a war. I mean, the moment China will have war with a single ASEAN country, no matter what bashing they want to do to the Philippines, no matter how much they want to paint us as, America's little brothers, etc., the reality is that that's going to really strain China's relations, and that's going to spook a lot of other fence-sitters, right? So China has an interest to be responsible. Unfortunately, not in their public statements, but I hope behind the scenes, there's that kind of sense of responsibility. So there was no breakthrough, but I would say also there was no total breakdown, because Dong at least made an effort to reach out to have a conversation with his American counterpart. They will say their public stuff. But what I'm looking at is in the coming days and weeks, what are the concrete efforts by US and China to reestablish those frayed military-to-military communication channels, queues, and other sorts of communication channels? Because this is the last time, this is the worst time not to have communication channels between the two superpowers, just as tensions rise in Taiwan Straits and South China Sea.
Very good to hear that war may not necessarily be imminent. You've given us plenty of food for thought. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Richard Heydarian, Senior Lecturer at the UP Asian Center.
We're going to be pausing for a quick break for now. Right after that, the Office of the Ombudsman has suspended Bamban Mayor Alice Guo and 2 other officials of the municipality amid her alleged links to the pogo industry. The details when the big story returns. Keep it here.
Welcome back to watching the big story here on One News. The Ombudsman has suspended Bamban Mayor Alice Guo and 2 other officials of the municipality following grave complaints filed against them by the Interior Department. Ria Fernandez with the story.
The Office of the Ombudsman orders the preventive suspension of Bamban Tarlac Mayor Alice Guo as she continues to face issues concerning her identity and her supposed involvement in pogos in her town. Aside from Guo, other Bamban officials are also facing 6-month suspension. These are Business Permit and Licensing Office Head Edwin Ocampo and Municipal Legal Officer Aiden Sigua. This suspension order stem from administrative charges filed by the Interior and Local Government Department against Guo and the 2 other officials over alleged grave misconduct, serious dishonesty, gross neglect of duty, and conduct prejudicial to the best interest of service. The 9-page order made by Ombudsman Samuel Martirez dated May 31st said that they found sufficient grounds to suspend the 3 from office. Among the allegations cited is Guo's supposed financial interest in the Baofupogo compound as she continues to own shares of its stocks, contrary to her initial statements that she already divested from it since becoming mayor. The Ombudsman also pointed out that Guo did not cancel or revoke the business permits of the Zunyuan and Hongsheng Pogo companies, despite the raid and the cancellation of their license to operate. BPLO head Ocampo was implicated for processing and granting permits to Zunyuan despite incomplete documents. Guo, meanwhile, allegedly neglected his duties as the legal head of Bamban by failing to investigate the resolution of the Municipal Council on the application of Zunyuan. The Ombudsman explains that Guo's suspension was merely a preventive measure to make sure that Guo and the other officials will not use their positions to influence the ongoing investigation against them. However, they could still be permanently removed from office if the allegations are proven true. In a statement, Guo says she accepts the Ombudsman's decision, but notes that she will continue fighting her case. She also maintains that she's innocent of the allegations. Guo adds that she is ready to cooperate with the authorities to clear her name. The Solicitor General is also conducting its own investigation into the Bamban Mayor's case. Soljan Menardo Guevara clarifies that the Ombudsman's order has no impact on their own probe.
In the case of the OSG, we're looking at a very different angle. So if there is basis to conclude that she is not legally qualified to hold public office or to continue exercising public office, then we may consider the matter of filing a petition for quo warranto.
Meanwhile, for Senator Risa Ontiveros, who is leading the probe against Guo and the Pogo operations in Bamban at the Senate, says that she is looking forward to their executive session with Guo, where she hopes that there will be more clarity on Guo's role on the illegal Pogos in her municipality or whether she's a threat to the country's security. For News 5, Ria Fernandez, We Are One News.
It was former President Duterte all along. I mean, the one who ordered the transfer of 47.6 billion pesos from the DOH to the PSDBM for COVID-19 supplies in 2020, which the Commission on Audit had later called out. Former DOH Secretary Francisco Duque III revealed this to lawmakers at a House hearing this afternoon. Marian Enriquez has that story.
Former Health Secretary Francisco Duque III faced today's House budget hearing for the DOH. Part of discussions centered on the DOH's transfer of 47.6 billion pesos to the Budget Department's Procurement Service Office back in 2020. Lawmakers questioned why the transaction did not have a memorandum of agreement between the two agencies. Duque said apart from an executive and administrative order, the budget transfer was green-lighted by then President Rodrigo Duterte.
Ito ay inauthorize ni former President Duterte, tama?
In his public pronouncements, the transfer was done because of the public health emergency which he declared sometime in March. Ito po kasing decision na ito based on the recommendation of the IATF, NTF. I would like to reiterate that it is within my authority to effect the transfer because of the public health emergency where there were no enough CSEs, PPEs, and other COVID pandemic supplies.
Representatives also questioned the move to classify PPEs or personal protective equipment as commonly used supplies.
It's true that we had asked the GPPB if they could consider as common use supplies and equipment the list of life-saving COVID-19 CSEs and other materials. So it was the PSDBM, or not the PSDBM, but the GPPB that eventually granted our request that
and
this
that is in writing, Secretary?
I think it is in writing. I will look into this, Madam Chair. I think this
could you
is
kindly submit
in
that
writing.
letter to the committee?
Yes, Madam Chairperson.
This did not convince Solicitor General Menardo Guevara.
Ang one legal question dyan ay makaklasify mo ba na commonly used items, yung mga gamit na yan to combat the pandemic, no, COVID-19, can they be classified as commonly used items na po pwede mong ipasa sa PSDBM? So that's a very critical question, no? However, you can also argue that we are dealing with a pandemic. Probably the DOH felt that itong mga PPEs, yung mga test kits can be classified already as commonly used items in the context of a pandemic. So probably yun ang magiging legal issue, if at all, that it will be questioned before a court of law.
The House committee hearing now opens up Duque to further scrutiny after the Office of the Ombudsman filed graft charges against him and former Budget Undersecretary Christopher Lau last month for the said transfer of funds and procurement. The former health chief is currently appealing the graft charges. The Committee on Appropriations, meanwhile, will continue its hearing on June 13. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
After another break, Manila is warning its customers in the south not to drink water directly from the tap or even use it for cooking. The details when we return.
Welcome back. You're still watching the big story here in One News. Manila has issued a warning to avoid drinking or using tap water for cooking for its customers in Muntinlupa, Parañaque, Las Piñas, and Cavite due to water quality issues in Laguna Lake. Shaila Francisco with that story.
Manila has issued a warning for its customers in the south not to drink water directly from the tap or even use it for cooking, particularly in certain barangays in Las Piñas, Muntinlupa, Parañaque, Bacoor, Cavite, and Imus, Cavite. Around 159,000 homes are affected by this issue. One such home belongs to John Almerino of Barangay Almanza 2 in Las Piñas. This situation has led to additional expenses for them as they now need to buy mineral water for cooking rice.
Alalo na po ako, ma'am, kasi po meron po akong amebiasis. And then meron po akong bata dito sa loob ng bahay, which is medyo maselan din po yung tiyan pagdating po sa tubig. Ayoko namang i-ano sa risk yung health namin mag-ina. Baka naman mapagastos pa ako sa gamot.
So what led to this issue? Maynilad explains that the quality of water in Laguna Lake has been affected by the onset of the rainy season. The water in Laguna Lake has become salty, which means it takes longer to clean at their water treatment facility. But if they prolong the process, some areas might run out of water, so Maynilad has not tightened the quality standards of the water. The water is actually clean, and you won't notice any difference in quality. But according to Maynilad, the quality of the water can be compared to well or groundwater with high mineral content. This might be noticeable when doing laundry because the bubbles disappear quickly during rinsing. Currently, it is slightly higher than the standard set by the Philippine National Standards for Drinking Water.
Actually, hindi siya masama inumin, pero we'd rather be on the safe side.
The Metropolitan Water Works and Sewerage System Regulatory Office is investigating the quality of water in the affected areas served by Maynilad.
Maynilad is supposed to provide potable water 24/7 to its customers. So this is not potable water. So we want to understand the situation. This is seasonal. This happens every year. So they should have been ready for this.
At present, the MWSSRO has given Manila 3 days to address the water quality issues in some areas it serves. If the issues are not resolved within that time frame, appropriate fines might be imposed. Shaila Francisco, WR1 News.
This news just in, Mount Canlaon in Negros has been placed under alert level 2 after a phreatic eruption just this evening. The volcano spewed volcanic plumes around 6:50 p.m., reaching a height of 5 kilometers. FIVOLX says the eruption is ongoing. Mount Canlaon's phreatic eruption followed several days of volcanic earthquakes, and we'll continue to monitor that story and bring you the latest as it progresses.
All right, well, it is June 3rd, and June is Pride Month. And while the Soji bill languishes in the Philippine Senate, Mexico is taking big steps forward. Our big picture tonight is none other than Claudia Sheinbaum, who is set to become Mexico's first female president. Mexico's official electoral authority said preliminary results showed the 61-year-old former mayor of Mexico City winning between 58% and 60% of the vote in Sunday's election. That gives her a lead of almost 30 percentage points over her main rival. Once proclaimed, Sheinbaum will replace her mentor, outgoing President Andres Manuel López Obrador, in October. Prior to running for president, Sheinbaum was mayor of Mexico City, one of the most influential political positions in the country, and one that is seen as paving the way for the presidency.
That's great. But one of the headlines I saw on Bloomberg coming into the studio says Mexico's peso extends its decline to more than 2% against the dollar after preliminary election results show a landslide for the ruling party. So I wonder what that means, whether the investors are not liking it. Maybe they're not ready for
a female
president. I don't know, but there you go. The Mexican peso is weakening.
It is also World Bicycle Day today, June 3.
You should have brought yours.
I should have.
Oh.
It does not match her outfit, unfortunately.
Do a little demo.
All the cyclists out there.
Do we celebrate it? Do we mark it somehow? We should.
I think you bike it.
No, I know, but here in the Philippines, I remember last year there was an event maybe around this time.
Yeah.
Nobody organized anything this year.
It was a slew of social media posts honoring their bicycle. And the biking community, para kasing ano yan eh, parang partner in life mo. You feel attached to your bicycle.
But there's
Until
no
you buy
mass,
a new one.
But there's no mass ride this time around.
Wala.
Well, I appreciate that because the weather has been kind of temperamental and the traffic is pretty bad. But you know, it's only Monday, so we'll see what the rest of the week brings. It's going to be a lot of news, I expect. But that's it for the big story on this Monday night.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.